We're going to be going over the wall tool.
Mhm.
Up until this point, we've been using line tools and rectangle tools, so basic 2D tools to create our objects. But when we get into drawing walls, we want to show and portray as much information as possible. So our walls aren't actually just two lines, they're built up of multiple components. So if we go to our building shell tool menu, so down in our specialized tool sets, it's the little building menu. At the very top is the wall tool. So this wall tool, once we have it selected, we can see at the top that it has multiple menu options. So the gray vertical line separates those menu groups. So those first four icons are the first menu group. The second two are the second menu group. Then our third menu group are wall preferences and our wall style drop down menu. So when we are getting into drawing walls, there's going to have multiple components, and when we are drawing it, we want to draw, say if we had specific dimensions, we want to draw so that those dimensions are applicable to the outside of our sheathing. So when we're dimensioning our exterior dimensions, they are to that exterior or outside of sheathing. So we want to make sure that they're referenced in that way. So right now, the way it's set up, I can just go and click and draw a wall. It looks and behaves like my polygon tool. And if you can see this, one of the mode options is polygon mode or rectangle mode. So I've drawn 4 walls, and each of those walls have an outside and an inside and a solid fill on the inside. So it would take a bit longer to draw that just using our line tool or a rectangle tool. And I can see up in my object info palette, I have 4 walls. I can see in my wall style that it's an unstyled wall. Also in my object info palette, I can see that it's an unstyled wall as well. I can scroll down, or maybe we're okay. In my object info palette, I can also change the wall style, the type, the thickness, the height, what those height measurements are linked to. So like I was saying, in our layer settings, our design layer settings, we can specify wall height and their starting elevation, so our bottom bounds and our top bounds. And then we can cap our walls. And we'll get into that a bit more. So if I look at my walls right now, these are very simple walls. They don't have a lot of information. They are all selected. So then I can manipulate them and move them just like any other objects. I will get into the selection tool where there's specific buttons that apply to walls, but right now we'll just stick with our walls. So this is great for just a regular, simple, unstyled wall. We might, but now we're gonna draw a bit more of a complex wall. Before I do that though, I will show the other, that was the polygon mode. So when we're using the polygon mode, we want to make sure we draw in a clockwise direction. That puts the right components at the right locations, and it's the right reference for when we're placing in specific dimensions and values. So always when you're using the polygon tool, make sure you're drawing in a clockwise direction. Even if you're starting, say you're wanting to do an extra wall, if I want to make sure that I draw in a clockwise direction. So now I'm going to select all my walls. I'm going to delete them and go back to my wall tool. I can now select the rectangle mode, and I can see that acts just like our rectangle. I can click my first point of my diagonal clicking my second point is my other diagonal. And then by 2 clicks, I have 4 walls with an outside and inside infill. Okay, there's also our control line insertion modes. So right now at this point I've just been using my left control line mode. So when I draw my wall, the line that I'm drawing is the outside or the left line, and this is why it matters in what drawing direction we do, because if I'm facing, it's like I'm facing this wall from the start and the outside is the left and the inside is the right, right? And now if I'm drawing walls and I press my U key, I can toggle between the center insertion line or my right, or I can do a custom as well. And right now at this point, it's just a center, okay? So this is all at this point relative to the entire wall, and that's this icon here. We can also do a core component control line mode, but in that case we have to have core components. So if I go up into my wall tool, if I either select on my wall style drop down menu, I can see that because we've opened our document with an architectural template, it automatically takes us into this Imperial Wall Styles simple. And I can see that there's 57 items in this library, and I can do generic walls, I can do curtain walls, and I can do exterior bearing, concrete, CMUs or concrete masonry units, foundation walls, interior partitions, metal, stud framing, or wood framing. So the thing with this library and this program is used worldwide. So these wall styles might not be applicable to our local building codes. So what we want to do is we want to pick one that most closely represents what we want to use, and then we can edit it from there. So in this case, I'm just going to use this exterior 2x6 wood siding. I'm going to double click on this, and I'm going to, now I can see that when I draw my wall, it's to the outside of my entire wall. So if I tab in, and just like our line tool, I could specify that I want this to be 30 feet, hit enter, enter, and then I want this to be 20 feet, and then I can be, I can delete. Delete will take me back a step, and escape will take me out of the entire operation. So now if I use my dimension tool, so which is in our, if I measure from the outside of my wall, I should get 30 feet. And I do. Okay. So, but like I was saying earlier, we don't want to measure to the outside of our wall. We want to measure to the core component. So I'm going to select all these objects, Command A and delete. I'm going to go back to my wall tool or shortcut 9. So now I'm going to, instead of referencing my entire wall, I'm going to use my core component. And again, I'm just going to do the same thing. Tab in 30 feet. Okay, so now when I take my dimension tool, I should be able to, now the thing is, I know for a fact that the core component in this case for this wall style is the stud framing. So not exactly where we want to measure from, but where this is going to measure from, and I get 30 feet. Okay, So now here we have components, and I can see that right now I have the siding on the outside, then the sheathing, then the stud framing, including insulation, and then my drywall. Okay, so I will show you right now what happens if I go in a clockwise direction or a counterclockwise direction. My drywall is on the outside and my siding is on the inside. Not a there's always ways of fixing and modifying, so I don't necessarily need to redraw things, but also in measuring, it's not going to be the right calculations. But what I can do, in all these sides are reversed. In my object info palette, I can just click this with my walls selected. I can click reverse sides, and it's going to then reverse all those sides. So now the siding's on the outside, the drywall's on the inside. Okay, so reverse sides covered. Now, this, we addressed those problems. Now the problem with this is that it's not quite actually where I want to measure it from. So if I want this point to be at this point and this point to be at this point. So I'm an inch off, okay? So what I could do is I could go up into my selection tool and I could just move my wall. See? But what happens when I move my wall, you can see that there's this like outline of my rectangle. So it's kind of showing me if I extend it, I'm moving this wall over here and it's going to actually keep the other walls joined. It's called this auto join mode. So I can just tab in and I can offset. Actually, I want this to be -1 and hit enter. And then that moved that wall -1. It kept them all joined. And now my dimension is correct. Now, that's because I have this little wall join mode button selected. So if I deselect this mode, this is in my selection tool, but it's applicable to my walls and editing and modifying my walls. Now, if I move this wall, you can see that you don't end up with that outline, but it just moves that wall separately. So sometimes we're going to want to move walls separately, and I can just move that wall if I want to, but it doesn't maintain those wall joins. If I select all 4 of my walls and I want to move all of my walls, if I have my wall joins selected, I can't grab all 4 of them and move them. It tries to keep them joined and it just moves the one wall that I clicked on. But if I deselect my wall join mode, I can then move all 4 at the same time. So that's that button there in our selection tool. Okay, so I'm going to delete these back into our wall tool. Okay, so we've drawn in a clockwise direction using our polygon mode. We've seen what happens when we draw in a counterclockwise direction, and we've also used the rectangle mode. Now what I'm going to do is, it's not quite the right core component that we want. So I'm going to go into my little wall tool preferences, the little wrench and pencil. And what happens is it brings up this wall preferences dialog box, and they are, because I had already selected a wall style, the exterior 2x6 wood siding, that's the one that is selected and it shows me the preview of it. It shows me all the core components. I can click on that wall style menu and that list of preset wall styles are all available there. Tells me that I have a standard wall, curtain wall. It shows me the wall, what it looks like, my overall thickness, and then I can edit wall attributes, and it brings up if I want to specify a fill or a pin style. Now the thing is, each of these components also have fills and pin styles. So I'm just going to cancel out of that. Now, here we can see what the components are. So we have our wood siding on our exterior, our sheathing, our wood stud framing, and I can see beside my wood stud framing there's a check mark, and it says that's indicating that that is my core component. And then I have my gypsum board or drywall. So we here in BC, we have rain to deal with. So we have what's called rain screen, or like strapping to an airspace. So what we want to do is that's going to be in between my sheathing and my wood siding. So I can either go new, or I can select an existing component and duplicate that. I want to, by double clicking on that component, I can edit it. So I will just call this rain screen. I'm going to leave the thickness at 1/2 inch. I'm going to change my class style so I can differentiate between my sheathing and my rain screen. And even my siding. My siding's white. So I'm going to leave it solid, and I'm going to leave it with this bit tan fill. And I'm going to hit OK. But like I was saying, we actually want it between our sheathing and our wood siding. So I actually intentionally changed this one because we can easily change our stacking order. So by hovering over these numbers, I can see I get this little, it changes my icon. And what I can do is I can grab that component and drag it up and put it in the location where I want it. So our core component, so that's, we've added a component. We've moved our component. Our core component, when I say we want to measure to the outside of sheathing, so then I need to change my core component from my stud framing to my sheathing. So in this case, when I tab in and I specify specific dimensions, it's going to be applicable to the outside of the sheathing. My wood stud framing is good. My gypsum board, I don't actually want 5/8. I want to change this, so I'm going to double click and go into my wall component settings and specify 1/2 inch and hit OK. And now I have this wall style the way I want it. But I can see up in my wall style, it's unstyled. And if I click out of here and I create walls, it will create walls using these settings. But if I make any changes or switch wall styles, I'll lose all those changes I've just made. So before I go any further, I want to make sure I save preferences as wall style. I don't want to rewrite the existing one. But it's close, but it's just with rain screen. And now I can hit OK. And see what happens is now it says my wall style is exterior 2x6 wood siding with rain screen. I can hit OK. So now if I have my core component mode selected, I have my polygon mode selected. Right now I have my left control line mode. So I'll just show you the difference. So here I'm going to go in and I'm going to tab again 30 feet. And then tab and 20 feet. Okay, so I have my walls, and now if I dimension from the outside of sheathing, so if I go in here, I want from this point, right, which is the outside of sheathing, to this point, which is the outside of sheathing, I get my 30 feet, right? And now if I go here, outside of sheathing, and I want to make sure I get that point, and get that endpoint again. Oh, I'm 1/2 inch off. So if I'm off, I need to make sure I'm at the right location with my dimensions, because it's very easy. And I think what happened is this one didn't snap to the right location, and it didn't. So I can go into my selection tool, I can grab this witness handle and I can put it in the right location. Okay, so that was with my left insertion mode. Now if I say use my center, if I tab in and I specify 30 feet, and in this case 20 feet, oh my goodness, I'm right on top. Move these out of the way. So now I specified all those values, the same values as these walls here. But if I go in, and now if I measure from the outside of sheathing to the outside of sheathing, I don't get my accurate dimensions because I was in my center control line mode. So it's half an inch off, okay? So this is where we have to kind of set up our walls prior to drawing them so we get the correct settings. Now, one last thing before I'll let you get drawing them yourself. Now, if I select my wall, so I have my selection tool, if I select my wall, I can see that it has blue object handles just like a line does, except on one end we have a square and a triangle. On the other end we have a square. So what the square and the triangle is differentiating the ends, right? Because when we have a line, it doesn't matter which end is which. This square and triangle represents the start of our wall, so that, okay, this is the start. So if I'm starting from this point, this is the left side of my wall, this is the right, this is the end. So we need to know so we can know which side's left or right. Now, if, for instance, we want to put caps on our walls, we can see that in our object info palette right now, it says I have a cap on the start. I can have no caps. So you can see that that changes the wall like that. So it did have a cap. I could also have a cap just on the end, except this is joined, and it caps it in that way. Or I can do both too. So that's just options that are available. Sometimes we're going to want to cap our walls, and we're going to need to know which end we want to cap. And when we're referencing our walls, if we need to know which side is our start and which end is our end, so that we can know which side is left and right. Now the thing is, we've been using our object info palette to we can modify our shapes, right? So it does say that have the same information like length, angle. For polar coordinates, it does have the change in X, the change in Y. But if I look at where the object handles are, I can see in this case it's at the end point, which is fine. But here, it's actually measuring to this is the end point. So we don't necessarily want to use, and we can see it's 29 and 9 3/4. These measurements for dimensioning our walls, those reference points aren't the same that we use for when we dimension our walls. Does that all make sense? Good? Okay.